We've brought in the experts for a live Ask ABC7 special, answering your questions about economic future, some of the questions that we too have as well. So joining us live this morning, Ali Hashemian, president of Kinetic Financial, Nick Vyas. He is the founding executive director of USC's Global Supply Chain Institute. So thank you both for joining in with us this morning. Nick, I want to ask you to start things off because we just talked about the tariffs. I'd like for people to, let's get away today from some of the headlines and people just see tariff, they see things going up. Let's talk about the why behind this. And it really does go back decades as to what we're trying to do with these tariffs.
So Philip, you're absolutely right. It does go back decades. So you think about the tariff, the deficit. It's basically the difference between what we export versus what we import. What I call what we consume versus what we create. Since 1980s, 81, 82 was the first, those years were the last years where we actually had a 50% equal, both on the creation side and the consumption side. Today, our GDP, 70% comes from the consumption. So we lost track of the creation side, what I call the manufacturing prowess. So if we peel the onion and get to the core of this issue, I think what President Trump in 2.0 specifically is trying to do is sledgehammer our ways into building that creation base, the manufacturing prowess, back to the 80s level, which is something to talk about.
It's also something to ask whether that's reasonable. I want to ask Ali this question about this, because if this were to happen, if somehow because by the way, as a result of NAFTA, many will say that the manufacturing sector in this country left. And so we don't manufacture, we don't create, and we killed the middle class. That is what many people will say. So from the investment standpoint, how realistic is it to start to see manufacturing that's going to create jobs, create wealth, create investment for people, and maybe build a middle class, which will, again, be better for our 401ks, for our investments? I mean, when you're looking at the markets, they're reacting to what's happening right now. We need, as investors, to react to what's going to happen.
Yeah, although I'm concerned about the immediate repercussions, right? We've been on the longest bull run market we've seen, and people have gotten spoiled by that. Right now, we're almost overdue for a crash. I was speaking to the professor about this backstage, that at the end of the day, something was going to cause this market to break, and my biggest concern is the fact that if this breaks right now, while the baby boomers are retired or retiring, while this might help the future of the middle class, I'm very concerned about what this does for the people that are in retirement years.
And you're nodding your head, because this really is a long... You have to remove yourself from the rhetoric that often happens politically and really look at what's happening. So is this a concern for you as well, the way it's happening?
Well, I think the way it's happening is concerning, right? So do I believe there's a reason for us to sort of strike the balance of consumption versus creation? Absolutely. Do we have to do it in a manner by which we're doing it? And that is a question. And answer is no. I think there has to be a tactful, very strategic way one can address these things, right? Do I have to go back to the manufacturing of 19th century, where we were the midst of the industrial revolution? And the answer is no. We can create a new economy, knowledge economy, service economy, right? So there are ways to actually address these issues. Do we have to treat our allies and adversaries in the same way? And the answer is, I'm not sure that's the right approach. So I just came from Europe. I said, I was addressing the European Logistics Congress in Porto Rose, Slovenia. I just flew back yesterday. And the concern is, our allies are wondering, who do I really side with? Is it the US, the long-term bet, or do I start to cozy up to China? Or what is the new world order going to look like? So I think that uncertainty, what creates the friction, both in a financial market, in a global trade, and global supply chain.
Well, Ali, that is a perfect springboard. I was actually doing the interview with Senator Adam Schiff, and one of the things he pointed out that is a negative to this policy that we're talking about is that if the U.S. walls itself off with tariffs, all of these other countries, specifically the European Union, will just trade amongst themselves, and we're kind of left out. And in the short term, that could be a very real damage to people's investments.
And what happens in the future when people get used to this type of trade situation? So while the long run, this is supposed to benefit here in the United States, jobs, manufacturing, my concern is, do we, again, alienate ourselves from our allies, like the professor was saying? And does that put us in a situation where in the future, trade may be completely different than what we see today? So yes, I think everybody obviously is concerned about the financial markets, whatever you call this one. We had the tech wreck in the 2000 through 2002 era, the subprime mortgage crisis. You want to call this one the import implosion, whatever it is, that's the immediate concern. But long term, how this shapes up, I'm concerned about that as well.
Well, one thing to also understand is, I did a little light reading yesterday, and I was trying to read the documents for NAFTA and for the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement, which was during Trump's first term. So it was the USMC. The way we are trading now is different. These small items that are done through Amazon, DHL, FedEx, that are shipped around, those weren't even part of the trade deal. The internet era didn't even exist really when NAFTA was first brought in. So trade is different, and these small items from small businesses, those are different. But we saw tariffs imposed with the first Trump administration. Can you tell us financially how there are similarities between how we recovered then and what is facing us now when you're talking about investments? Because there is still a reaction to the USMC. Let's not be prisoners of what's happening right now. Let's just look back 6-7 years and see how we recovered from that.
I think the big difference, though, is this is so much more widespread and so much more dramatic, right?
Yeah, many people might not have even known about that trade deal.
That's right. This one is a big deal right now. When we're talking about 34, 54% type of tariffs, that's a huge difference to what we were talking about 6-7 years ago. Add on top of it just the fact that we're now 6-7 years further into the major population in the United States retiring, becoming more and more dependent on Social Security, draining that resource, Medicare, all of this, plus a large portion of the workforce no longer working. I mean, it's just a little bit of a perfect storm right now. And I think that's the main concern and the reason for the VIX going off the charts, the volatility index, the reason why we're seeing 2 back-to-back days with 4% plus drawbacks in the market. And I just urge everybody that's watching out there to have a plan of some kind in place. Whether you're 30 years old and working and contributing to your savings and retirement plans, or you're 70 years old and you're in the distribution phase, no longer the accumulation phase, these type of things continue to happen in our financial markets. Whether it's trade or something else, I really tell people just have a plan, be prepared.
And I want to ask you about age-appropriate investing next, but I do want to real quickly ask Nick again, how, with supply chain, with issues like tariffs and things like that, and if we are trying to generate more manufacturing, it takes a while I mean, our supply chain is a very finely, the idea that you can get fish fresh in Monroe, Louisiana, the whole system is amazing, and this kind of disruption, you don't make massive changes quickly.
You're absolutely right, Philip. I mean, you do not only not make the changes quickly, but think about it. It took us about 4 decades to get to where we are today. You can't just pitch the tent and spend a night and figure that your manufacturing base will come back to it. It's years, if not multi-decades, to actually reestablish the footings, right? We need physical infrastructure. We need digital infrastructure. We need policy infrastructure. And foremost, we need human capital. If you think about, do we have the resources to onshore everything? So here, again, I go back to, I think your question was Trump 1.0 to Trump 2.0. What is the major difference? The one was to China plus strategy, right? One of the biggest pandemic, COVID-19 taught us that was the biggest pandemic of the century. We learned that we were overly reliant on a one country, in this case, China. So yes, we needed to decouple. So companies took a massive bets, and they went to Vietnam, went to India, Mexico, thinking that these are the allies of the US, and if I invest billions, I have a strategy in place that we should be okay. You wake up today, that may not be the case. So now they're saying, how do we not only decouple from China, but now from the rest of the world and come home to? And that is a huge supply chain challenge. You know, we wrote a book about network design, how to build agile, resilient, and sustainable supply chains of the future. Even we didn't think that this stage would be created this rapidly.
Well, and you also have to ask yourself, Trump 1.0, there was the possibility of a second term, and now you're talking about investing billions. Do you just wait for the 4 years to end and see what happens? So that will be a question that we have to ask. We do want to get to some of the viewer questions. The one that's on a lot of people's minds is, quite literally, how does this affect my retirement plans? And we want to say thank you to Dean Cesario for asking this question from Mission Viejo. How long will the market go down? Am I in danger of losing my 401k? So, Ali, if you can answer how long, then you have all of my resources.
Well, let me just rub my crystal ball real fast. You know, we have seen market crashes happen more rapidly, right? But the biggest concern I think people should be at least considering is something similar to the tech wreck that we saw in 2000 through 2002, where it was 3 years, and it felt like it went on forever during that period of time. In some ways, we forget that the 2008-2009 market crash with the subprime mortgages and those toxic assets that the banks held, at least it was somewhat quick, right? And so we were able to hit the recovery mode rather early in a crash stage. And right now, if people aren't thinking about that, then they don't have a plan in place for dynamic distribution, especially for retirement assets, taking money from the right place at the right time. I mean, we call it dynamic distribution in the industry, but it's just a fancy term for taking money out of the right place at the right time.
And let's go to there, because I wanted to ask about age-appropriate investing. First off, for all of you new people that are just starting your careers, invest. Yeah. Don't let this stop you from investing. Your 401k is really an interesting thing. You're not losing anything technically because you haven't cashed out. So what you just said is a very interesting thought. If they are, A, close to pulling money out, B, maybe they're in their 50s, C, they're in their 30s, what are you doing within your 401k? What are you looking at, because you're limited into what you can invest? How are you doing that?
Well, first of all, remember, and I tell the audience, remember this, many 401ks have a self-directed portion, right? Where you can really broaden your investment choices. But compounding is definitely the most powerful force on the planet. And so if you're not continuing to accumulate assets while you're trying to build your retirement, that's just setting yourself back from retirement years, maybe decades. But what you said is the biggest thing that I think people need to realize, which is you never really lose money in the market until you realize the losses, right? The market's a roller coaster. Yeah, the market's a roller coaster. It goes up and down, but you gotta stay on this ride. Warren Buffett says, be resilient, right? In times like this, don't panic, throw away your statement, turn off your TV, turn off your radio. I just think that that's fine if you know what you're doing and you have a plan in place, but you're gonna realize losses if you're taking money out of these things when stocks are down, or God forbid we have a situation like 2022 where both stocks and bonds were down. That old 60-40, 70-30 portfolio doesn't hold up in a situation like that. I will also remind people, if you're over the age of 59 and a half, even if you're still working, most 401ks allow an option called an in-service distribution or an in-service rollover, which allows you to roll over a portion of your 401k even while you're continuing to work. You still get your match, you can still make contributions, but that may open up your investment options to things like CD ladders or treasury ladders or annuity ladders. These are all places where money goes as a safe haven.
Okay, our second question from Dina in Downey. She asks, I have a regular 401k. Should I take out what I have left?
That's a pretty specific question. I think it depends on your particular situation,
Yeah,
like you said,
if you need the money.
and where you are, right? If you need the money, there might be better options like a loan against your 401k, potentially to avoid taxes. I do think one strategy that people are not considering, which should be on the tip of their mind, are Roth conversions. So if you're talking about taking the money out and converting it to a Roth, or doing that internally when the markets are down, I mean, that might be the silver lining. That might be the play to make right now, to be able to do Roth conversions at a discount and get that money tax-free. Because whether it's tariffs or something else, you need to prepare for a higher tax environment. One way or another, our government needs to generate revenue to combat this national debt and this budget deficit that we have.
Well, and from a person who is not the greatest of investors, it would also be important to note, especially if you are a new investor, this is absolutely not the time to be scared of the markets. I mean, right? I mean, this is a time, if you're 30 years old and you are long away from retirement, this is a time to just keep investing.
I would say that there might be one of the best opportunities we've seen in nearly a decade and a half to invest, right? We haven't seen a good market crash that creates those opportunities. I think on top of that, even if you're retired or nearing retirement, you maybe should have had some money, some firepower on the sidelines, ready to get opportunistic in a market like this. We may see stocks at a significant discount soon.
And Nick, what were you about to say?
No, I was just going to say, I know in Trump 2.0, we have heard this called the golden age of America, right? I would not discount that statement. I mean, this is a course correction, that for 40 years, this can was kicked down the street by both sides in this country, right? Nobody addressed the structural issues. Even COVID did not wake us up in terms of how do we recalibrate some of the structural deficiencies that we created through what we call this globalization of the economy, right? So I think in the long run, if it's done correctly, and there is a optimistic side of me thinks that this is a sort of a negotiation vehicle that President Trump is using, let's bring those allies on the table quick. Let's settle the differences. Let's build a sort of a new world order where multilateral trade agreements are built on the faith relationships. At the end of the day, trade is about allies working together, following the fair practices, building the agile and resilient and sustainable supply chains for the future.
Yeah, that's one thing that as I've looked and read as much as I could on tariffs, free trade isn't free. It's not a level playing field in many cases. And I think that there are times when it seems like a sledgehammer when we're telling people, but when product coming in from out of country is taxed at a certain rate, and then ours going out is taxed at a different rate, I think that is one of the de minimis. I don't want to get too far into that, but that's an issue when an item coming from Mexico for $50 and under is okay, but ours is $800 and under. That's a problem.
And that's exactly right. And
I might have gotten those backwards as far as going out and in.
But I think your point is well taken. I think that's what the viewers have to really be cognizant of the fact that these are some shocks, so structural shocks, right? And we need to absorb those in a very graceful way.
Okay, we have a couple more questions that we're trying to get through, and we have about 2 minutes to go. One viewer asked us, how much money invested in a 403B could I lose if I participate 3% per year if the tariffs keep going up and a recession hits? Again, age appropriate really matters on a lot of this stuff.
And it really depends on what they're invested in, right? I think that if you have a balanced portfolio, it's very feasible for you to lose 20, 30%. If you are significantly more weighted towards aggressive investments, stocks, especially small or mid-cap stocks, 50, 60% is not out of the realm of possibility.
Okay, so we're about a minute away. We see that we're right here. Again, I thank you so much, Nick, Ali. Thank you for joining us. We want to remind people, again, you don't lose anything until you sell it. Have a plan in place. If you're a young investor and you're watching what's happening, this should be a lesson to you to have a plan in place long term when you get ready to go.